Time for another video, and before we get started, a big thank you and shout out once again to everyone who has liked and subscribed so far. This is a channel dedicated to helping others improve as artists in the most efficient manner possible by leveraging the research of neuroscience, meta-learning and autodidacticism. And today I'd like to finish our discussion on spaced repetition learning with a look into something that people have shown a great deal of interest in, which is the books I have used as a lodestar to take me towards mastery of painting and drawing. Some of these books you may have seen before if you follow the channel, but I will show some I've never discussed before today as well. So today we will be looking at how to find the best books when trying to learn a new skill, the books I use personally, and why books are special in the world of learning, as well as why we have as a global society forgotten their true meaning and usage. I've said this before, but I want you to remember something. When seeking sources to learn from, especially as a beginner, you want to avoid getting too specific and instead focus on the broadest, most generic, most abstracted principles you can find, as these will propel you the furthest. What I mean by that is, if you're a total beginner at art and start following an online course for how to draw anime characters, and it jumps into things like clothing folds and poses, you'll probably fail like I failed. The reason is that this teacher is probably already good at drawing generically, that is, drawing foundational things like anatomy and three-dimensional looking volumes. Yet now they're teaching something specific, like clothing folds and poses. If you try to train this specific thing with no general foundation, then you'll probably find that your drawings look off, you become dissatisfied with your work, and possibly give up drawing altogether. Unless you understand perspective, line weight, overlap, anatomy, shape language, and all of these other general artistic concepts, you'll never be able to more specifically draw anime characters as well as the people who are drawing with these foundations already under their belts. The problem I have found is that most teachers are coming at you from that position and assuming that you are there too. It's not their fault. They assume you already know the basic stuff. They might even mention that you should be using it in passing, but it takes a while to learn it, and so you struggle along with the content, getting more and more annoyed and giving up on art. Simply put, most courses, YouTube videos and books tend to assume some pre-existing skill and experience. As I grew more frustrated with these materials and the lack of prerequisite teaching, I wonder why nobody had ever just made a simple roadmap that took you from being a total beginner to being able to draw or paint whatever you want, if that was even possible. But my prayers were answered when I discovered Scott Robertson's books, How to Draw and How to Render. It's not so much that Scott is an amazing artist. He is, but there are many of those. What separates Scott's books from those of others is that he is a good teacher, and that is what you should be seeking out when carrying out your searches for good sources of education. Whereas other learning sources may gloss over certain key aspects or explain them in a confusing order, Scott seems to be able to say the most with the least amount of words and get you doing the things that make the biggest difference in your learning. Some of the stuff I will cover today is specific to things like landscapes or comic books, but these two books, How to Draw and How to Render, are the most general. They don't cover drawing heads or scenery or comic book panels, but I promise you that everything in here will be used for the rest of your life when drawing or painting anything. If you are a total beginner, this is a great place to start. If you're experienced but getting frustrated, then you probably need to brush up on the things in here. Basically, whoever you are, these books will probably benefit your art in some way, and none of the other books in the video today can claim that. And better still, it's laid out as a roadmap, and it covers the generic, most abstractive principles of drawing form. It takes you from drawing lines and circles without a ruler or guides to grasping basic perspective and then complex perspective. You can learn how to turn the simple forms you can draw into aeroplanes and then cars while considering camera lenses and view angles. It teaches you that everything you could ever want to draw is made up of cross sections in 3D space and how to combine them to make anything from any angle. This is exactly what we see artists like Kim Jung-gi doing, albeit in his head, and this is really the entire conceptual overview of the How to Draw book. That 2D cross sections, arranged in perspective, make realistic looking three-dimensional volumes. This is how I have got to my current level of drawing skill. The second book builds on the first, showing how to plot shadows for your objects and assign values to them to make them appear solid. From there you learn how value is related to colour and how to make things more or less reflective, as well as how to make them look like they're made of different materials. This forms a fantastic foundation to take you from the more general aspects of art to the world of more specific things like landscapes or anatomy, or the intricacies of colour and light. The roadmap style of these books and their very generic foundational focus is my main reason for recommending them so highly. Another book that works like this but is more specific in scope is called Get Started with Gouache by Emma Block. It features a simple lesson plan to follow that takes you from painting swatches with different colours or opacities of paint to working in negative space and building up to eventually painting animals, food, people and places. You can work in a simple illustrative style like Emma does to get a feel for the medium of gouache very quickly, or apply knowledge you have from other books and resources to build on these simple lessons and make them whatever you want. She has a similar book on watercolours as well. She's an excellent teacher and author who has clearly considered how to best take you along a logical path from getting used to how paint handles to using it to make complex images like landscapes. Another painter who produces books like this is Victoria Semyonova, but I personally prefer the lessons and examples covered by Emma Block. That's just me though. Speaking of painting, I only started learning to paint early this year. It's a complex subject that can be thought of as equal parts mastering the actual medium and mastery of how colour and light work. I chose roadmap style books like those just discussed to start learning it because they present a clear and logical path to take you in baby steps from a total beginner to actually standing on your own and running your own experiments. But there are other books that take a different, slightly more openly experimental approach from the beginning. You've probably already seen me mention the book of Rediscovering Gouache by Alyosha Blau. While not so much of a roadmap style book, it explores many different ways to work with gouache which are highly unique. He uses sponges and reed pens to create specific textures, and while colour and light are mentioned, I consider this more of a valuable book for learning how the medium of gouache works, and the experimental approach it encourages the reader to undertake in learning that. This is the next best sort of book when no roadmap is present: experimental encouragement. It should give you an idea and encourage you to experiment with it and stress test it to see what you can do with it. This is closer to the concept of what we call immersion learning, where we just roll up our sleeves and start doing the work without any basic training. But instead of blindly jumping into immersion and struggling, we have someone telling us what to do and what to avoid, which will save you some time in your learning. I have another book on gouache I use, which is The Art of Gouache by Jeremy Ford, and this one features some interesting uses of gouache in what he refers to as a poster style, which is how a lot of the old school iconic British rail adverts were created. My older UK viewers may fondly remember them. I also like his approach to painting gradients with gouache, and once again I consider this more of a how to use a gouache book than a how to use colour and light book. This one is the weakest in terms of teaching, and it really just contains a few techniques that the artist uses and how he uses them, which is useful but not really for a beginner. These books were viewing paint more in terms of the technical skill pillar, that is how the paint handles and ways to apply it. When looking for books on painting, you might find that they tend to fit this format and cover more on how to use the paint, be it oils or watercolours, than how to use paint to represent reality. To look more closely at representing reality, we do need to become well versed in using colour and light expertly. This has been a huge stumbling block for me personally, and the main reason I have probably started and stopped painting several times in my life. I would paint using the colours straight from the tubes, and yet the colours would end up muddy or looking off compared to those artists I admire who can make the paint look as if it's glowing or like there's real light and shadow at play on a piece of paper. My favourite book on this subject is Colour and Light by 3D Total Publishing. They're a UK-based company that make a lot of art books, and we'll see some more of their products later. They have some material available for free on their website, so you might consider checking them out. Colour and Light starts very simply by walking you through the individual aspects of colour in terms of importance, which would be value, chroma and hue. It discusses the difference between chroma and saturation, how exposure works, and how to key a painting to get the correct exposure. In this sense, it's a bit of a roadmap style book, but leaning more heavily on the theory side of things. My favourite thing about it though is that it specifically tells you how you can isolate and train some of these aspects. For example, if you want to play with chroma in Photoshop, you paint with a single colour and only adjust the value and saturation sliders. This will limit your ability to select colours to a narrow range, as you will only be able to make your single hue warmer, cooler, lighter or darker. To do this with traditional paint, just pick a warm and cool variant of any single colour, black and white. This is how I'm learning to wrap my head around how artists with more mileage than me see colour and how they decide which direction to adjust their paints in as they work. I value these aha moments whenever I find them, as they help me level up my knowledge and understanding. Sometimes you just need someone to explain something to you in a certain way. It also talks about light and how it works, which overlaps with a lot of the stuff in the How to Render book by Scott Robertson, but I don't mind this. When looking at books, many of them repeat the same thing, but this actually helps us immensely. That's because if something is mentioned so prolifically across so many books, then it must be the most important thing to study. That means we want to spend more time there mastering that thing first in order to gain the biggest increase in skill. It's also beneficial to have the same info explained by different authors who give their own twist and help you to understand the subject from slightly nuanced perspectives, fleshing out your own personal understanding. The book then goes even further by showing you how a bunch of super talented artists like Gouache and Nathan Falks go about constructing their paintings using the information you just learned. This is great because instead of getting one artist, usually the author, showing how they apply a lesson, we get different high-profile artists showing us their individual approaches. We can compare what they all do, what they do differently to one another, and what they do which is the same, and this is very useful. One thing that annoys people about 3D Total is that their books always feature a gallery section in the back. That means this big hefty book you just paid a lot of money for might be a third full of people's paintings, but only 2/3 full of learning information. I understand that complaint, but I personally like the gallery sections as they help to demonstrate different ways artists have used the information in the book and give you new sources of inspiration. A lot of this is about trying to get as much as you can out of any one book, so even something which is just filler can have some valuable knowledge extracted from it. Another book I highly recommend is Colour and Light by James Gurney, and yes, it has the same name as the previous book. This one doesn't feel like it explains things as logically as the 3D Total book, but for a long time this was the only book on the market that really discussed this stuff in an easily digestible way. It explains things that the 3D Total book lacks as well, such as specific lighting setups like contre-jour and how they impact us emotionally. It also shows us how the old masters used colour and light back in the days when far fewer pigments were available to paint with. Unlike the 3D Total book, it makes no mention of digital art, so that might affect its usefulness to you. Other books I would give an honourable mention to here are Alla Prima by Richard Schmidt, which is fantastic but relates to mostly oils, and it assumes a fair bit of pre-existing skill. Another one I like for watercolours is Mastering Atmosphere and Mood in Watercolour by Joseph Spukvich, but from the names alone you can probably tell that these books deal with more advanced specific areas of painting, and so they're not that beginner friendly as a result. There are no roadmaps to guide you here, but they do feature ideas and experiments for you to try once you have some experience. While colour and light are used to great effect in everything from product concepts to portraits, one of the areas where you really do need to have them mastered is in landscape painting. If the things we've covered so far are more generic and getting gradually more specific, now we have entered a niche, painting the scenery around us. To paint landscapes, you need everything covered in the books that we have mentioned so far. That is, a good solid grounding in form, some skill with handling paint, and a knowledge of how value, colour and light work. Landscapes bring their own challenges, and one such headache for a beginner is composition. Not only do we have to be able to do all of the things that we have looked at so far, but we also have to be able to narrow our focus to zone out most of the stuff in front of us and paint just a small slice of it, possibly even altering it to fit our canvas better. Composition is equal parts logical and emotional. Where we place elements on a canvas appeases us as humans when done correctly, and like any system, this can be exploited to evoke certain emotions within the viewer. Combine this with all the knowledge you have now for colour and light, and you should be able to lead the viewer's eyes to wherever you want them to go and capture what fascinates you about your scene. There is one author who I really like for landscape specifically, and that's Mitchell Albala. He has two books which are actually very similar to one another, called Landscape Painting and The Landscape Painter's Workbook. The latter is the newer one, and it acts like a bit of an update to the first. You see, the first one was more about working in oils, but the second one generalizes the lessons, there's that word again, to make them more readily applicable for people who want to work in soft pastels, watercolors, or anything else. The book takes you through the importance of value in a different way to the other books we have seen so far. You'll learn that thinking in just two values, black and white, is ultimately all you need to direct the eye to wherever you want in a painting. You'll be doing paint studies using 4 values to break the landscape up into sky, areas that directly face the sky, which we call ground planes, areas that half face the sky, and areas that do not face the sky at all. It's a remarkably similar system to the one employed by Scott Robertson in How to Render, and that's because this is how light works. However, this version of the system is viewed through the lens of landscapes exclusively. You'll also work on how to frame the vast landscapes in front of you, learn more about colour, especially how to mix different types of green, and making decisions about what to include, but more importantly what to omit from the scene in front of you. And that's the reason I like these books so much. Painting landscapes or anything else is really about learning to see in a very specific way, where we subtract as much detail as possible to paint the most basic information. These books will teach you how to see like that, and that is something we can apply to other things, like painting people. Anatomy is probably the biggest stumbling block for most people, I think. When I started learning anatomy, I got confused by the fact that some artists quickly used gestural drawing to make awesome figures, while others meticulously crafted perfect anatomical images. Then there was anime and comic books, and across this broad spectrum of different anatomical styles, I didn't see how learning the muscles or figure drawing eventually led to any one of them. How important were all these muscle groups and stuff? Could you really memorize them like Kim Jong-gi and be able to draw them from any angle purely from imagination? Well, you can, but in order to manage that, you really do have to have mastered the stuff that we discussed earlier in this video first. You see, anatomy is a more specific offshoot, a niche like landscapes, and so it has to be supported by those foundational skills we saw earlier. Once you can draw boxes in perspective from imagination, you realize that the human body and any part of it fits inside a box, and that's most of the work done for you. The rest is a little understanding of proportions and the shapes and forms of the different body parts, how they lock together, how they move, and how they deform. Sounds simple, but you and I both know it's anything but. I have many anatomy books in my collection, including the ones that I was recommended to pick up when I first started learning, the classics by authors George Bridgman, Bern Hogarth, and Andrew Loomis. You've likely heard of the Loomis method, for example, as the go-to way to construct a head. I spent a lot of time just copying images from these books, and when I tried to draw a human without the book, something annoying happened. I failed miserably. I couldn't recall exactly how things were supposed to look, and I couldn't get the angles right, and it was down to just copying the sketches as shapes, like tracing them but on a different page without the tracing paper. I was very good at copying shapes and angles in the drawings, but the problem is I was not thinking about them as 3D forms turning in space. To help you get on the right track, there is a more recent book that approaches figure drawing entirely from that viewpoint, and that's Drawing Form and Pose by Tom Fox. Tom is an interesting guy. He had no art experience and he studied zoology at university. He worried he would have no applicable skills upon graduating and wanted to practice something cheap and easy to pick up, so he started drawing. A decade or so later, and he's gone from being a total noob to almost Kim Jong-gi levels, able to draw figures and entire scenes totally from his imagination. If he can do it, so can I, and if I can do it, so can you. His book starts by introducing you to the most important ways to depict form, which are thinking in 3D, or XYZ terms as Scott Robertson calls them. This concept must be important because it's covered in both books, but it also covers some new concepts you can bring into your drawing which we have not encountered yet. That will be things like overlap to create depth, simplification to make the viewer fill in the blanks of your drawings, leaving gaps in your lines, foreshortening, and contour drawing, where we focus on the silhouette of the figure and think in more two-dimensional terms. This gives us multiple approaches to drawing. We can work in three-dimensional XYZ terms that we've seen so far, but we can also draw the figure as a flat two-dimensional cardboard cutout, and both methods have their merits and limitations. The majority of the book, however, is dedicated to exactly what I mentioned earlier, how each part of the body is broken down into simple forms, how they fit together, and how they move and deform in space. There is one more thing that my time studying anatomy has revealed though, and I feel this is what makes it one of the things that people find hard to get their head around initially upon trying to draw the human figure. Let's say that Tom's work is at 50% on a sliding scale. He only shows as much detail on his figures as he thinks necessary, letting the brain of the viewer fill in the blanks. This concept of reduction and simplification is another very important lesson to understand for all of art, but it can be hard to express that limited detail without knowledge of the more complex detail it actually represents. For example, if we move all the way to the right on this scale, where we draw maximum detail, I have this book, Anatomy for Sculptors by Aldous Zarins. It says it's for sculptors, but you can use it for painting and drawing too. It breaks down the body into forms like Tom Fox's book does, but in a different way. As well as showing you the actual fibre level muscle detail, should you care to learn that, I use this book to make sure I understand the body in great detail, but then I'll draw it more at the 50% level, like Tom Fox does. But there is another thing that we see some artists do. They reduce the body down even further, sliding this scale all the way to the left, transforming it into more shapes or quick gestures. This is more like what some cartoonists or anime achieve, an understandable human figure, but heavily stylized. If you suck at drawing anime, this may be the reason why. Can you see how these artists possess everything we have covered so far, including the anatomy slider being closer to 100%? If you only ever train down here at 10% drawing anime anatomy, you do not understand enough about the higher levels to reduce it down correctly. I found that the best books for viewing anatomy through this simplified lens are some books by a South Korean artist called Tako. They have a couple of books called Point Character Drawing and Secret Character Drawing. I only have the point character one right now as the other one has not been translated into English yet. This book is useful for a couple of things. Firstly, it breaks down some of the simple measurements and checks you can bear in mind when constructing figures to make them look more correct. For example, the distance between the hairline and the nose is usually the same measurement as the length of the neck. Once you have that information internalized, a quick check in your drawing and you can make a character look more or less realistic. It also deals with anatomy in this simpler shape-based approach, showing you how you can depict more complex three-dimensional forms using placements of 2D shapes. I would not recommend doing this unless you have spent some time thinking in 3D, or you'll end up doing what I did, being excellent at drawing these shapes, but not being able to draw them from any angle without the book handy because the concept of 3D space will be alien to you. Learn the form first, then learn to reduce it with books like this. You can also hopefully now see why just copying your favourite manga, anime or comics might not have actually given you the skills to draw like the creators you admire. They drew that cute anime girl thinking about reduced anatomy and 3D forms, whereas you are copying shapes, in 2D terms, from that reduced outcome, never appreciating the more advanced framework that is secretly hidden underneath it. If you can understand the framework though, then you can go nuts and start to copy your faves and develop a bit of their style. I have a whole bunch of manga books that I got mostly to read but also for the art. Manga books didn't really start appearing in stores where I live in the UK until maybe the mid-noughties, like 2004, when I was in my late teens. I remember the first time I saw Blade of the Immortal and was instantly hooked. I had to be able to draw like this. I copied so many images from those books, and I still like to do this occasionally to this day, but I now do so understanding that Hiroaki Samura and other artists like him are creating these with a very potent understanding of everything we have discussed so far, as well as a new skill: how to assemble images to tell a story. That is something you can learn from copying these books though. Other favourites of mine include anything by Sean Murphy, Mike Mignola, Raphael Albuquerque and Jason Latour. I also really like Chainsaw Man by Tatsuki Fujimoto. When you look at art you admire, try and think what it is you like about it, and focus on that if you want to do studies like this. Try and really hone in on the thing you want to absorb from the art, and practice that. Is it the expressive line work? Is it the way the anatomy is simplified? Is it the mastery of difficult perspective? This can then inform you and show you what more generic things you need to train to help you reach their levels. The issue with this sort of copying from books, however, is that it is unguided. You are not being explicitly taught art lessons by the author, but have to have enough skill to be able to find them expressed in their finished work. Another book that gets an honourable mention for storytelling is Framed Ink by Marcus Mateo Mestre. This book examines what a lot of your favourite comic artists and film directors are doing all the time, which is telling stories with images and the placement of elements on the canvas, page or screen. It's quite similar to the Albala landscape books in that it focuses on using two values, black and white, and how we can use lighting and placement of forms and shapes to guide the eye, invoke emotions, and tell our stories. It will change the way you watch movies. You can use the simple templates in the book to experiment with your own compositions. Another book that I found to be perhaps the simplest way for learning this concept is Picture This by Molly Bang. It uses cut pieces of card rearranged with each turning of the page to help exaggerate certain ideas we want to express to the viewer, and it's another one of those books that's excellent because it's set out like a roadmap and deals with a very general concept that can be applied to all of art. Every time you turn the page, she has tweaked her composition a little to exaggerate an idea she wants to express, and you can see it happening for yourself, so it makes learning very easy. There are other specialist niches in art you might want to track down books for that I have not covered here, things like working with oil paints or drawing animals. There is also observational drawing, which is a basic skill for which I would recommend the book Drawing Course by Charles Barg, but I want to discuss observational drawing separately in a future video. These books are all more specific, and we are getting into the little nooks and crannies of art that you probably shouldn't really be concerned with until you have a firm grasp of the basics. For example, I have another couple of books by 3D Total here. One is the Beginner's Guide to Creating Portraits, and the other is the Beginner's Guide to Digital Painting in Photoshop. How specific is that? No mention of colour theory or value here, just how to get up and running in Photoshop. If you bought this book alone, as a beginner wanting to learn to paint, your paintings would never reach the lofty heights of the artists using Photoshop that you admire, because remember, they have mastered the more generic foundational principles of art. They are not mentioned in this book. It assumes you already know them, and so you would get frustrated when your paintings don't look like the examples shown. There is one more thing you may have picked up on so far. Although these books are awesome, no single book covers everything. You need a collection of books and other resources to build up a decent idea of how a field really works in order to learn it. This may also include in-person lessons, online courses, or anything else that you feel you can learn from. So why do I find books so useful? I've probably taken as many art courses as I have read books, and I'm still not an expert. Sitting through these videos and courses, just like reading the books, will actually do nothing for you. It's the practice bit we need. These resources are merely the guides. Videos and courses are better than books in that we can see the process in action, which I find useful for reinforcing what I learn from the books. Some people prefer to learn via courses or even YouTube, and there are people with conditions like dyslexia who really cannot use books to learn from very well. That's totally fine, everyone learns differently, but there really is something special about books. Books force their creators to logically map out every point they want to express and then refine it to fit inside a limited page count. It has to be poignant and it has to be simple. Videos are usually compressed down to a time lapse in order to achieve the same thing, and while not always the case, they tend to suffer as a result, delivering watered down lessons, my own videos included. If you take something like an autobiography, what you hold is an entire person's life, all their lessons learned, all their experience, and all their knowledge in a single tome. Non-fiction books may contain ideas and concepts that an individual like Stephen Hawking dedicated their entire life to grappling with. He sat down and wrote about everything he learned, decades of work, condensed it into an easily digestible block of paper so that you can get up to speed with it in just a few days of reading. Can you see the power of this? Books allow for the transfer of knowledge very quickly, and this is how human society has grown to the level it has. We can distill down an entire lifetime's worth of lessons, capture them, and share them with others. But there's a problem, and I was first made aware of it by the book Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. It's about an American journalist going from writing a piece about the World Memory Championships to training for and winning the very same championship a year or two later. If you're interested in meta-learning and neuroscience, it's a good book, but not so much for arts. In the book, Joshua talks about how back in medieval times, books were not commonplace like they are today, because paper was very expensive and books had to be copied by hand. There was no printing press yet. If you went to somebody's house, instead of asking to see their brand new games console or graphics card that nobody can seem to buy anywhere, you would have asked to see their book. And these books were precious because they all contained ideas and concepts that only the wealthy could afford to learn. Instead of going to Paris to learn directly from someone, you could read their writings and learn that way instead. It was revolutionary. People would only own a single book, they were that expensive, and when they finished reading it they started over and read it again, fiercely trying to internalize the knowledge it contained. It was effectively spaced repetition learning. But then something happened. Around 1463, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, and suddenly books became much easier to create. This was another revolution because it democratized books and therefore learning. Now anyone, rich or poor, could learn to read and then read to learn, but it had another effect on us, an unforeseen one. Because books were now cheaper, we read them and then we left them on the shelf or threw them away. We would read them one time and move on to the next one, retaining very little of the information inside them. I bet if I asked you what you can remember about a book you have read, you would only be able to recall snippets, perhaps the bits that had the most impact on you. But by rereading the same book, or better yet, a book chopped up into Anki cards, you gain the ability to glean new information every time you revisit it, and by making notes in it, you expand your understanding of the subject further. There are more books than we will ever be able to read, and more knowledge out there than we will ever be able to learn, so we need to find the books that will impact us the most, and here's the key difference: study them repeatedly. That's really what I'm using Anki for. I'm trying to treat books in the same way that they were once seen, with the respect they deserve and an appreciation for the knowledge they contain. Tom Fox spent 10,000 hours drawing, and I can learn everything he learned in that time frame in far less time because of his efforts by studying his book. He captured all that effort and consideration about how best to draw the figure and condensed it, distilling it down into a few hundred pages. He did a lot of the hard work for us, so it will take us less than 10,000 hours to get as good as him. So how do we find the best books for a subject we wish to learn? The best way I have encountered to find the best books comes from Tim Ferriss in The 4-Hour Chef. He wanted to learn cooking, and so he set off on a quest to find the best handful of cookbooks, which, as you can imagine, is no easy feat as there are thousands in existence. He figured them out by cross-referencing Google's survey results, Amazon reviews, and Nielsen BookScan sales numbers. Any book that scored highly on all three from beginner cooks was shortlisted as a potential candidate because beginner cooks found it useful. Nowadays there is likely an AI that can do that all for you very simply, and I've experimented with GigaBrain for this. I'm not affiliated with the product in any way, but it effectively scans Reddit to find what real people think about things like products on Amazon and summarizes it for you. It's not as in-depth or accurate as Tim's method, but it gets the job done faster. We can use tools like these to quickly and unbiasedly critique books and other sources of education to narrow down our search and find the ones that will get us where we want to be in the fastest, most efficient way possible. So to recap, today we have looked at how, when learning a new skill, it's important that we start with the most mentioned general foundational knowledge and gradually work towards more specific applications. How any knowledge which is covered in multiple books must be the thing we spend the most time trying to master, as it's the most important. How to find books that best fit that description. Why books are special. And the books I have found most useful for learning art in such a generic to specific way. Hopefully you found that interesting and useful, so I thank you for listening. As I mentioned, as well as books, I have also undertaken many courses on painting and drawing, so I'll produce a video at some point covering the best of those that I have found. I'm always on the hunt for new books and educational resources to help me in my learning journey, so please feel free to share anything you rate highly in the comments and I'll check it out. Perhaps there was some book or course that you felt really helped you progress rapidly in skill. Next time I'll be back with a brand new art learning experiment as we enter the fascinating world of accelerated learning. So join me next time if you'd like to learn how to rapidly improve your art within just 1 month. Sounds too good to be true, right? See you next time.